The Cherokee storyteller Thomas King says the truth about stories is that that's all we are. It's an elegant way of saying that reality is what we make it. That reality is the stories we tell ourselves. With this in mind, today I'm going to tell you my story. The story that was told to me, and the story I eventually came to tell myself. My story and what I understand about it. It's a story about growing up. And it starts, like all stories, with parents. My mother, Patricia McDonald, strong, proud, resilient, a survivor. My mother was what in those days used to be called a battered woman. Eventually she raised 4 children alone, 3 girls and a boy. My father, Robert Wells, an alcoholic, abusive, by all accounts, a deeply troubled man, and someone whom I never really knew. I only have a very few memories of my father, one of which is indelible. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, 7 at the most. I know this because of where we were living. And I came upon my parents late one night in our kitchen, fighting, physically fighting. And my mother, in protecting herself, must have scratched him because he had claw marks on the side of his face and blood running down his cheek. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and we started to cry. And I looked at him, and I asked him why he was crying. And he looked at me, but he couldn't speak. And we just stood there, staring at one another. I remember feeling bad for him, thinking that he must be crying because he's hurt and bleeding. After a few minutes, seconds rather, not minutes, my mother shuffled me off to bed, and we never ever spoke about what happened. Never ever, till the day she died, did we ever have a conversation about what I'd seen. And I never ever told anybody what I saw until today. And there's a reason for this. My father was, of course, not crying because of physical injury. He was crying because he was ashamed before me, his son. Ashamed of being a violent man prone to fits of rage. He died not long after that night in a car crash, drunk driving. It was a single vehicle, single fatality accident. March 1978. I was 9 years old, and I just shrugged it off. Made light of it to my friends. I used to laugh about it even when I would tell people. And I did all that because even though I was just a boy, not yet 10, I had already learned that that's what men do. That men are self-reliant, that men are resilient, that men never show weakness, never show need, never show pain. It's nonsense, but that's what men do. And the flip side of this absolute retreat into the shell, that is to say, the other side of this man coin, is the tendency for men to process their emotional needs with aggression. And that's exactly what I did. I started fighting in school and out of school at exactly this time. It's something I would continue to do for decades. And honestly, I was admired for it. The better I got at hiding any kind of pain or need, the more I would dominate, physically or otherwise, the more I was presented as a model for other boys and eventually other men to follow. I captained most of the sports teams I played on, always violent, hockey, football, rugby. In retrospect, it's clear to me I played these games not to compete or win, but to have an opportunity to exercise, that's exercise with an O, my pain through aggression within a socially acceptable context. The truth is, I played these games always trying to hit other boys as hard as possible. And believe me, every time I did, it was celebrated. My teammates, coaches, family, and friends all praised me for this. And I enjoyed it. I used to say, I can't believe they let me do this, with youthful hubris. Now I say the same thing. I can't believe they let me do this, with pensive melancholy. Melancholy because I see now that my behavior was really symptomatic of much broader, deeply disturbed social norms and constructs that reward boys and men for abandoning one of the fundamental qualities that makes us human: compassion. The fighting is something for which I would get in trouble, but the real message from the grown-ups was entirely the opposite. It was always very clear to me that people were proud of me, even if they told me that fighting was a bad thing. All of the adults in my life did this, almost without exception. I was basically validated and encouraged to process any emotional need with reticence, anger, and violence. So that's what I did. I fought all through elementary school and high school and well into my 20s. There was always some twisted rationalization attempting to justify the behavior according to some moral high ground. But looking back, I really believe I was merely reflecting an ideal of man presented to me in popular culture. My heroes were hockey enforcers: Chris Nyland, Bob Probert, Dave Schultz. Is it any wonder? When they would fight, 20,000 people in unison would jump to their feet and cheer wildly. I wanted to be loved like them. In film, it was Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Eastwood. Everywhere I looked, it was the same model. I remember seeing this ad in the back of a comic book for children, the Charles Atlas weightlifting program. The message here is that a man solves problems through domination via physical prowess, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of that inequality. The gist being that a real man never lets anyone push him around. I was weightlifting before I turned 10, and it's something I do to this day. And if I'm honest, I've never done it for health or even vanity. It's always been to send a message to other men. I had my last street fight at 26 years of age. That's 26 years ago this year. And if I'm brutally, embarrassingly honest, it matters to me that I won. Because even though my intellect recognizes the behavior as idiotic, my ego, on some level, still fears not being regarded as a man. After that last street fight, I carried on the aggressive behavior in other more subtle, but still socially admired ways. The truth is, I made a career of it. In particular, my approach to my work at StansteadCollege is no nonsense and often confrontational. Some of you know. Things are nuanced, but basically a big part of my job is to ensure order. And I've done it more or less the same way it's done in society at large, and that is via compliance, internally and externally, to the masculine archetype. So that's my story. Vulgar, I realize. Common, base, barely human, and totally human. There's a quote I heard years ago that says, "Man differs from animal only slightly, and most men throw that difference away." And that's sort of how I feel about myself, that I've been subsisting in this animal side of myself for so long, unaware. It's ironic to me because I consider myself educated. I studied under Jesuits in high school. I went on to study science and philosophy in Asia. I have degrees in mathematics and comparative religion and education. By all accounts, I should have been enlightened, but really, I consider myself to have been deeply, deeply in the dark. So, why the change here now, beginning to see? I have to tell you, I have mainly women to thank. I'd like to be able to say my mother, but I can't do so, I'm afraid. I said earlier she was strong, but really she was tough. She ruled with an iron fist, and I don't blame her. For her, it was about survival in a man's world. And so she did the obvious thing: adapt herself to and adopt male values. The bottom line is that my fighting was condoned. I want to be clear, I don't blame my mother for me being aggressive. I consider us both a product of the same patriarchy and its machinations. Having children, however, I have 2 daughters, certainly was a blessing. I don't think I could have raised boys properly. I just don't think I could have raised boys in a healthy way. My children were never disciplined with corporal punishment, even though it was in vogue when they were young to do so. And for that decision, I must give full credit to their mother. I would have been very happy to repeat the patterns I knew. In retrospect, it was one of the best decisions ever taken for them and me. Because of their mother, I consider that a cycle was broken. And I think I would have found that much harder to accept had we had boys. I was also offered insight by a female friend who said to me one day, "You seem to process most of your emotions with anger." It was just a simple, beautiful, elegant truth that she was courageous enough to share, and one that I couldn't deny. Finally, and maybe mostly, I give credit and thanks to the makers of a documentary film called The Mask You Live In. It's by a woman, Jennifer Newsom, and it exploded into my consciousness the concept of which I had been previously unaware, that of toxic masculinity. That was almost 4 years ago, and in many respects, I consider it my beginning. I remember watching the movie, thinking for the first time that I had some understanding of myself. Because in learning about social constructs and gender norms and the difference between sex and gender, all just in the last little while, I've really come to see that behaviors are deeply influenced by categories into which we are placed and with which we come to identify. So the question then is, what is going on with men? Here are the facts. The single biggest predictor for propensity to violence and crime in every category is gender. Men lead the way across the board. The one exception is prostitution, but I don't think it's difficult to see that men are the common denominator in this instance as well. These statistical results are reproduced across age and race year after year in every country for which data are available. That means that in every country on earth for which data are available, masculinity is correlated with violence. We have a gender problem. Not a problem with biological males, a problem with men. and what societies teach it means to be a man. Because societies all over Earth are teaching that to be a man is to personify aggression. Now, some will say it's nature and not nurture, testosterone and all that. Honestly, it's not totally absurd to think along these lines, but at this point, it's overly simplistic and frankly dishonest if we don't acknowledge what is going on. I can agree that male aggression is natural to some extent, and that societies evolved reflecting this precept. But the framework from which this natural aggression was born, the physical world, is no longer the dominant influence in our lives. We exist more and more in the mental world and have for some time. Social media, social cues, our systems of education, the way we work, even our language, all of the things that influence, if not determine behavior, are social and cultural. We are no longer fighting to survive physically each day. We're fighting to survive mentally. But our mental constructs are geared to reinforcing strategies of how to survive physically. We have transcended from the physical realm to a mental realm, wherein that mental realm remains adjusted to serving the archaic physical one. We therefore have societies that produce toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity and toxic men, meant to survive and thrive in different circumstances. Obviously, this has to change. We must recognize and reinforce those qualities that serve our reality as it is, those qualities that will serve humanity and all Earth. Compassion, care, nurturing, forgiveness, empathy. All qualities generally associated with enlightened beings. And all also, you may have guessed it, traditionally associated with the feminine. It took me a long time to see, but it's very clear to me the future must be female. We must embrace this, we must build upon this, and we must raise our boys to be gentle men. It's the better story. Thank you.